My name is Emily, and I'm 32 years old. For the last decade, I've poured my heart into code, building systems that made other people rich while my own dreams sat untouched, like old books on a shelf. I always thought hard work would be enough, that if I kept my head down, someone would notice. But on November 12, 2024, in a glass-walled office that smelled of burnt coffee and ambition, I learned the truth. The world doesn't reward the quiet ones. Not unless you make it. The morning started like any other. I sat at my desk, surrounded by the clutter of late nights, empty coffee cups, a keyboard with worn letters, and a photo of my younger brother, Jake, grinning at his high school graduation. His smile was my anchor, the reason I swallowed every slight, every "not now, Emily" from my boss, Cassandra. The office buzzed with the hum of fluorescent lights and the clatter of keyboards, but I barely noticed. I was focused on the final touches for tomorrow's investor demo, a presentation built on my AI algorithm. It was my best work, coded line by line during sleepless nights while Jake recovered from a car accident that left him in a wheelchair. I thought it would change everything. Then Cassandra called me into her office. She leaned against her desk, her silk blouse catching the light, and smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was sharp, like the edge of a knife. "Congratulations, you're terminated," she said, her voice smooth, almost playful, as if she were handing me a birthday card. The words hit like a punch, stealing my breath. My colleagues, people I'd mentored, people I'd stayed late to help, stared at their screens, their silence louder than any shout. I felt the heat of humiliation creep up my neck, the weight of their averted eyes pressing into my chest. My hands shook as I packed my things, but my voice didn't waver. I handed over my laptop and said, "Good luck with the investor demo tomorrow." Cassandra's smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Security escorted me out, their hands hovering near my elbows like I was a thief. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft thud, and I stood in the parking lot, the autumn air sharp against my skin. My car was a beat-up sedan, its paint chipped from years of neglect, but it was mine. I leaned against it, the cold metal grounding me, and smiled. 10 minutes from now, the hidden code I'd buried in the demo software would activate. It was a failsafe, a digital time bomb that would crash the presentation unless someone entered a password only I knew. I hadn't planned to use it, not until that moment. Let me take you back. I grew up in a small town, the kind where everyone knows your business. My parents fought over money, their voices carrying through thin walls, but I found refuge in code. At 14, I fixed the neighbor's Wi-Fi and built my first app, a clunky game that made my friends laugh. Coding was my way of making order out of chaos, a language where I could be heard. When I joined Tech Trend Innovations at 22, I thought I'd found my place. Cassandra hired me straight out of college, her promises of changing the world dazzling my naive self. I poured everything into that company, 80-hour weeks, skipped vacations, ideas that became their flagship products. But every promotion went to someone else. Every raise was deferred, and every great work, Emily, came with a pat on the head, like I was a loyal pet. The slight started small. A year ago, I presented my AI algorithm, the one that could predict market trends with 92% accuracy. It was my baby, built during nights when Jake's pain kept him awake, and I'd code to drown out his groans. I showed it to Cassandra, expecting, hoping, for recognition. She nodded, said, "Nice work," and handed the project to Mark, a new hire with a flashy MBA and no coding skills. Mark got the corner office. I got a $50 gift card. The team clapped for him at the launch party while I stood in the back, clutching a plastic cup of cheap wine, my chest tight with the ache of being invisible. It wasn't just Mark. Cassandra interrupted my presentations, dismissed my suggestions in meetings, and once, in front of the entire team, laughed when I pitched a new feature. "Emily, stick to coding. Strategy's not your thing," she said. The team chuckled and I felt my face burn, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears long after the meeting ended. I'd go home to our cramped apartment, where Jake waited with his warm smile, and lie, telling him work was fine. He needed me to be strong. His medical bills were a constant shadow, eating up my savings. I took freelance gigs on top of my Tech Trend hours, coding until my eyes burned just to keep us afloat. That morning, before the firing, I'd overheard Cassandra on a call, her voice dripping with confidence as she promised investors a game-changing demo. My code. She'd taken credit for it, like she'd taken credit for everything else. I sat at my desk, staring at Jake's photo, and something snapped. Not anger, clarity. I opened my laptop, slipped a tiny piece of code into the demo software, and buried it deep. It was a simple loop, elegant in its destruction, designed to freeze the system and display a message. Credit where credit's due. I didn't plan to use it. Not then. But when Cassandra smiled and said those words, I knew what I had to do. As I stood in the parking lot, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, the only colleague who'd ever grabbed coffee with me. I'm so sorry. She's awful. I didn't reply. The code was counting down. In 10 minutes, Cassandra's demo would crash, and the investors would see the truth. I closed my eyes, the wind carrying the faint smell of diesel and fallen leaves, and waited. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The memory of that moment still lingers, sharp as the cold that bit my fingertips. I'd spent so long being the good soldier, the one who fixed problems and stayed quiet. But good soldiers get forgotten. I thought about Jake, how he'd wheel into the kitchen every morning, his sketchpad balanced on his lap, dreaming of a future I was fighting to give him. He didn't know how close we were to losing everything, how the bills stacked up, how my freelance gigs barely covered his meds. I couldn't fail him, not after everything. I climbed into my car, the seat creaking under me, and stared at the dashboard. The check engine light blinked, a reminder of all the things I couldn't fix. But this I could control. The code was my voice, my way of saying, I was here. I imagined Cassandra's face when the screen froze, her charm useless against the truth. Would she panic? Would she blame Mark? I didn't care. For once, it wasn't about her. The parking lot was empty, the office building looming behind me like a glass cage. I remembered the first day I walked in, my cheap blazer itching at the collar, my heart pounding with hope. I was going to change the world. 10 years later, I was just a line item, erased with a smile. But they couldn't erase what I'd built. Every system, every line of code, had my fingerprints. They'd feel me, even if they didn't want to. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. Demo's starting. Wish you were here. I almost laughed. No, she didn't. No one did. But they'd notice me soon enough. I started the car, the engine coughing to life, and drove home. The city blurred past. Neon signs, honking horns, the pulse of a world that didn't stop for me. I didn't need it to. Not anymore. The fallout from the demo crash was everything I'd imagined, and nothing I'd expected. I wasn't there to see it, but Sarah's texts painted a vivid picture. The conference room, with its polished table and floor-to-ceiling windows, turned into a battlefield. My code activated right as Cassandra clicked to the final slide, the screen freezing before flashing my message in bold red letters. Credit where credit's due. The investors, in their tailored suits, went from intrigued to stone cold. Cassandra stammered, her usual charm useless against the truth blinking on the screen. Mark, who'd been nodding along like he understood a single line of code, bolted to the bathroom. By noon, the investors had pulled their funding, and TechTrend's stock plummeted 15%. I sat in our cramped living room, the smell of Jake's instant ramen mixing with the faint mildew of old carpet, and felt a flicker of satisfaction. But it wasn't enough. I'm Emily, and for years, I thought if I worked hard enough, I'd belong. I'd built TechTrend's systems from the ground up, but they treated me like a ghost, seen only when something broke. The demo crash was my voice, a scream after years of silence, but it didn't erase the weight I carried. That weight was made of moments, small and sharp, that had piled up like unpaid bills. I needed to unpack them, to understand why I'd let myself fade for so long. The early days at TechTrend were different. I was 22, fresh out of college, my head full of dreams. I'd stay late, helping colleagues debug their code, my fingers flying over the keyboard as the office grew quiet. I brought homemade cookies to team meetings, their warm sugar scent filling the break room, hoping to belong. But the cookies vanished without a thank you, and my help was forgotten by morning. Once, I spent a weekend fixing a server crash while Cassandra was at a conference in San Francisco. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I got it done. She came back, saw the system running smoothly, and said, "Good to know someone's competent around here." She meant Mark. I smiled through it, my throat tight. and went back to my desk. Jake was my reason to keep going. After his accident at 16, he lost the use of his legs, but never his spirit. He'd wheel around our apartment, his sketchpad balanced on his lap, cracking jokes about his fancy wheels. His smile was a light in the dark, but his medical bills were a shadow that never left. I took freelance gigs on top of my tech trend hours, coding until dawn to cover his meds and therapy. Every time I wanted to quit, I'd look at him and remember why I couldn't. He believed in me, even when I didn't. "You're a genius, Em," he'd say, his pencil scratching out a new drawing. I'd laugh, but the words stuck, a lifeline I clung to. Cassandra's betrayal wasn't just the firing. It was the years of erasure, the way she made me feel small. I kept a notebook, a cheap spiral-bound thing I'd bought at a drugstore. In it, I wrote every idea I'd pitched, every project I'd built, every time she'd passed me over. It was my proof, my quiet rebellion. There was the time I suggested a security patch, and she waved it off, only for the system to crash a month later. I fixed it, and Mark got the credit. There was the client meeting where I explained my algorithm, and Cassandra cut me off, saying, "Let's keep it simple for the non-techies." The client later praised her brilliant mind. I wrote it all down, the ink smudging under my fingers, a record of my invisibility. After the demo crash, I didn't gloat. I couldn't. The satisfaction was fleeting, like the burn of whiskey before the ache returns. I sat on our worn couch, the fabric rough under my palms, and stared at Jake's latest sketch, a cartoon of me as a superhero, cape and all. "You okay?" he asked, wheeling over. His eyes, warm and steady, saw too much. "Yeah," I lied, my voice soft. But I wasn't. I was tired, of being unseen, of carrying the weight of their indifference. That's when I started planning. Sarah was my unexpected ally. She wasn't a friend, not really, but she was tired of Cassandra's games. Over coffee, in a cafe that smelled of cinnamon and regret, she told me she'd been saving evidence. Emails where Cassandra ignored my warnings about bugs, meeting notes where she dismissed my ideas only to claim them later. "She's a parasite," Sarah said, her voice low, her fingers tight around her mug. I nodded, the steam from my latte warming my face, and asked for the files. She sent them that night, a digital dossier of Cassandra's incompetence. I spent weeks combing through them, my laptop screen casting a blue glow across our living room. Jake slept in the next room, his soft snores a reminder of why I couldn't stop. I built a case, meticulous and undeniable. Every stolen idea, every mismanaged project, every time Cassandra prioritized flash over substance. It was all there, backed by screenshots, timestamps, and my notebook's pages, scanned and annotated. TechTrend's board was meeting in a month to review her leadership. I drafted an anonymous report, my fingers steady on the keys, and sent it to the board, copying a tech journalist I'd met at a conference. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. The plan wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about truth, about turning on the light. I'd spent years in the dark, my voice drowned out by Cassandra's laughter, Mark's arrogance, the team's silence. But the truth is stubborn. It waits, patient and sharp, until you give it a way out. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking under me, and closed my laptop. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the distant wail of a siren. I felt the weight shift, just a little, and knew I was ready. I'm Emily, and I've spent too long waiting for the world to see me. The demo crash was my first shout, a spark in the dark, but the real fire came later. When I sent that anonymous report to TechTrend's board, I wasn't sure what would happen. I only knew I was done being invisible. The weeks after were quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with possibility, like the moment before a storm breaks. I'd sit in our living room, the faint smell of Jake's acrylic paints lingering in the air, and check my phone for news. Then, on a gray December morning, the storm hit. The tech journalist I'd copied broke the story. Her article was brutal, precise, a scalpel cutting through Cassandra's carefully crafted image. It detailed the demo crash, the stolen ideas, the mismanaged projects, all backed by the evidence I'd provided. The board meeting turned into a bloodbath, or so the article said. Cassandra tried to spin the crash as a technical glitch, but my report was a sledgehammer. They pulled up emails she couldn't explain, notes where she'd dismissed my warnings only to claim my successes. By the end, she was taking a leave of absence, a polite way of saying she was finished. The article named me, not as the whistleblower, but as the coder behind Tech Trend's best products. My phone lit up with messages. Colleagues I hadn't heard from in years, recruiters, even a rival CEO offering me a job. I read them, the screen's glow harsh against my eyes, and felt nothing. I should have been thrilled. Cassandra's fall was justice, a consequence as natural as gravity. But I sat on our worn couch, the fabric rough under my fingers, and stared at Jake's sketchbook. He'd drawn me as a superhero, cape flowing, fists raised. "You did it, Em," he said, wheeling over, his grin brighter than any victory. I forced a smile, but my chest was hollow. The truth had set me free, but freedom felt like standing in an empty room, the echoes of old hurts still ringing. I'd spent so long proving myself to people who didn't care that I'd forgotten how to care about myself. The climax came unexpectedly, a week after the article. Cassandra called, her number flashing on my phone like a warning. I almost didn't answer, but something, curiosity maybe, made me pick up. Her voice was tight, stripped of its usual polish. "We need to talk, Emily. Can we meet?" I agreed, not for her, but for me. I needed to see her, to close the door on the part of me that still craved her approval. We met at a cafe downtown, the kind with exposed brick walls and the sharp scent of espresso. I arrived early, my hands wrapped around a latte, the ceramic mug warm against my palms. The place hummed with conversation, the clink of spoons, the hiss of the coffee machine. Cassandra walked in, and I barely recognized her. Without her office armor, silk blouses, high heels, she looked smaller, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. She sat across from me, her purse clutched in her lap, and tried to smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "You ruined me," she said, her voice low, barely audible over the cafe's buzz. I sipped my coffee, the warmth steadying me, and let the words hang. She expected me to flinch, to apologize, but I was done with that. "No," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "You ruined yourself. I just turned on the light." Her face twitched, a flash of anger, then desperation. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the table, nails polished but chipped. "The company's floundering," she said. "We need you back. You could lead the team. Get the credit you deserve. I'll make it right." I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who'd never change. She wasn't offering redemption. She was offering a leash, a way to pull me back into her orbit. I thought of the years I'd spent chasing her approval, the nights I'd coded until my fingers ached, the times I'd bitten my tongue while she laughed at my ideas. I thought of Jake, his steady belief in me, and the notebook where I'd written my truth. "You don't get it," I said, standing. "I don't need your approval anymore." I left my coffee half finished, the bell above the door chiming softly as I walked out. The winter air hit me, sharp and clean, and I felt the weight lift. That night, I told Jake everything. Not just the code or the report, but the years of hurt, the way Cassandra's laughter had cut, the way my colleagues' silence had burned, the way I'd let myself shrink to fit their expectations. We sat in our living room, the radiator hissing, the smell of paint still faint from his latest project. He listened, his eyes steady, his hands resting on his wheelchair's armrests. When I finished, he reached for me, his hug warm and solid. "You're enough, Em," he said, his voice soft but sure. It was the first time I believed it. The cafe confrontation wasn't the victory. It was the moment I saw Cassandra for what she was. Not a giant, but a shadow, cast by my own fear. I'd spent years thinking I needed her to see me, but the truth was simpler. I needed to see myself. The report, the article, the crash, they were steps, necessary but small, toward a bigger truth. I wasn't just a coder, a sister, a worker bee. I was Emily, and I was done apologizing for it. I went to bed that night, the city's hum filtering through our thin walls, and slept without dreaming. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up checking my email for Cassandra's approval or dreading the next slight. The hollow feeling was still there, a quiet ache, but it was different now. It wasn't defeat. It was space, room for something new. I didn't know what yet, but I knew it would be mine. I'm Emily, and I've learned that freedom isn't loud. It's not a cheer or a banner or a moment you can pin to a wall. It's quiet, like the sound of your own breath when you finally stop running. After I walked out of that cafe, leaving Cassandra and her desperate pleas behind. I felt it for the first time. Not victory, not revenge, but space. Room to be myself, without the weight of her shadow or the need to prove I was enough. The world didn't change, but I did. And that was everything. I didn't go back to tech trend. The offers came. Big companies, flashy startups, all promising the recognition I'd craved for years. I read their emails, the words glowing on my laptop screen, and deleted them. I didn't want their corner offices or their applause. I wanted something real, something mine. So I started my own company, a small app development firm focused on accessibility tools for people like Jake. It wasn't glamorous. Our office was a cramped room above a bakery, the air thick with the scent of fresh bread and the hum of old pipes. My desk was a secondhand table, wobbly but sturdy, and my team was just me, Sarah, and a part-time intern. But every line of code we wrote, every app we built, was for people who'd been overlooked, just like I had. It felt like coming home. Jake was my inspiration. His accident at 16 took his mobility, but it never touched his spirit. He'd wheel into our apartment, his sketchpad full of bold lines and bright colors, dreaming of becoming a graphic designer. His medical bills still loomed, but I wasn't scared anymore. I took freelance gigs to keep us afloat, coding at night while the city hummed outside our window. During the day, I built our company. Our first app was a navigation tool for wheelchair users, mapping out accessible routes in real time. Jake designed the logo, a stylized wheel, vibrant and alive. When we launched it, he wheeled into the office, his grin wide enough to light the room. "You're changing the world, Em," he said. I laughed, but my throat was tight. Maybe I was. Sarah was my rock. She'd left TechTrend a month after Cassandra's fall, tired of the corporate games. Over coffee in that same cafe where I'd faced Cassandra, she'd said, "I'm in. Let's build something real." Her voice was steady, her eyes bright with the same fire I felt. She handled the business side, budgets, clients, the endless paperwork, while I coded. We argued sometimes, our voices sharp in the tiny office, but it was honest. She wasn't my friend, not in the way Jake was family, but she was my ally, someone who saw me. That was enough. The work was hard. We scraped by on small contracts. Our budget stretched thin as the threadbare rug in our office. I'd wake up to the smell of coffee and the ache of late nights, my fingers stiff from typing. There were days I doubted myself, when a bug wouldn't fix or a client backed out. But I'd look at Jake's logo on my screen, or hear Sarah's quiet encouragement. "You've got this, Emily," and keep going. This wasn't tech trend. This was ours, built on truth, not stolen ideas. Cassandra faded into rumor. I heard she'd moved to Chicago, chasing new schemes at a smaller firm. I didn't care. Her fall, the demo crash, the article, the board's decision, was a moment, a necessary step. But it wasn't my victory. My victory was the morning I woke up and didn't check my email for her approval. It was the day Jake wheeled into our office, his sketches under his arm, and said, "I'm proud of you." It was the quiet moments, the ones no one clapped for, where I learned to be enough. I walk to work now, the city waking up around me. The air is sharp with winter's edge, carrying the smell of snow and diesel. Our office is small, cluttered with monitors and coffee cups, but it's alive. Jake's superhero drawing sits on my desk, the paper creased from years of handling. It's me, cape and all, fists raised. I used to think I needed to be that hero. Perfect, unbreakable. But I'm not. I'm Emily, with my chipped mugs and my messy code and my heart that's finally learning to rest. The hollow ache is still there, some days. It's softer now, less like a wound and more like a reminder. I spent years chasing belonging, thinking it lived in Cassandra's praise or my colleagues' nods. But belonging isn't something you find in other people. It's something you build, line by line, choice by choice. I built it here, in this tiny office, with Jake's laughter and Sarah's steady presence and the apps that make someone's day a little easier. I don't hate Cassandra anymore. She was a mirror, showing me the parts of myself I needed to face. The fear, the need to please, the silence I'd let define me, the code, the report, the confrontation. They were my way of breaking that mirror, of stepping out of her shadow. But they weren't the end. The end is this. Me, standing in my office, the morning light slanting through the window, my hands steady on my keyboard. The end is knowing I don't need anyone's permission to be whole. I'm Emily, and I'm free. Not because I won, but because I chose to stop playing their game. The world is wide, and I'm just beginning to explore it. Jake's designing our next app's interface. His sketches spread across the table. Sarah's on the phone, negotiating a new contract. And I'm here, coding, creating, living. It's enough. It's more than enough.